Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie, broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. Broadcasting on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and on TikTok. And thank you for coming in tonight. Folks, please do tell us where you're viewing from. Please send us your great British greetings and your comments and questions on this lovely July evening. Now, we've got a guest coming up at 7:30 at the bottom of the hour, and it is the writer and editor and British Unionist all the way from the United States of America. Some of you may know her. Her name is Avellina Balestri, and she's going to be our guest at 7:30, and we've got a connection right through to Maryland, and touch wood, that's going to work out well. We are going to be talking about our amazing day of activism and action last Wednesday, because we did not have a show last Wednesday, and the reason for that was because we were in Edinburgh, and there were 27 of us all together, and we were there to keep the British end up and to welcome King Charles and Queen Camilla to St Giles Cathedral, whereupon Charles was presented with the honours of Scotland, the sword, the sceptre, and the crown. And we were there especially in order to provide visual and vocal opposition to the group called Republic, who had come up from London. They had brought up their vans from London in order to be rude to the king. So we thought, well, we need a Scottish voice in there to show that we welcome Charles, King of Scots. And we had these posters made up. They were some excellent posters. They went down a storm. People were asking for them, but we only had a small number. Because that was all that we were able to resource at that particular time. But goodness me, as you'll see from the pictures, they certainly made a splash. And it doesn't take very many people to really change the circumstances of an event. And goodness me, we did so. And so grateful that we did. And thank you to all the people who were there with us, who really made things happen. Thank you to Debbie as well, who's first in this evening. Hello to Harry. Hope you're all having a good day. And to Derek from Armadale. And Kat says, your presence in Edinburgh last week for King Charles III was outstanding. Gained good press attention too, didn't it just, Kat? Catherine says, hello, kindred Unionists. And British Legends says, always proud UK. Hello to TC. Absolutely. Well, let's have a look actually at some of the pictures that we got from there. Now we just arrived. This is about 10:05, and we just arrived and we were taking our stuff up to the protest area. And this little bloke comes marching down thinking he owned the place with his poster that had been produced there down by the London-based group. And so I immediately whipped out one of our Charles, King of Scots posters, and this guy could see us there. And so basically he got closer, and then he got very angry. We'll just go back to that last one. He got very angry, and he started asking me all sorts of stuff as well. And he was, well, I'm not even going to go into what he was going on about, but he got very angry. He was a very unpleasant individual. unfortunately like a lot of those type of Republic people who had come up from London, because they're used to, doing their thing in London, where it's a bit stricter in some ways, especially, well, it was at the coronation anyway, but it was really quite straightforward for them here, because goodness me, they got their protest hugely facilitated. There was at the most about 75 to 80 of them at tops, and that includes the Scottish nationalist group that was in among them, and they had been given a designated protest area, and it was directly across from the front door of St Giles. A lot of people were really irritated about that. I mean, they got prime position, and they got beside one of these great big concrete bollards as well, so the leader of their group was able to climb onto the top of the concrete bollard with his megaphone and shout above everybody with his megaphone. And that's really annoying, and I discovered that place, the designated protest area, was decided not just by Police Scotland, but in fact by the SNP council that runs Edinburgh Council, as well as the SNP administration at Holyrood. They all had a hand in giving this group the best position in town on that day. Okay, next picture. So we walked up there, and at that stage there was just myself and our absolute fantastic fellow activist Anthony there, and there was another couple who immediately quickly joined us. And so what I decided to do, now I'm going to, we don't have the videos of that. I wonder if we could upload the videos. I'll work on these pictures. If we can upload the 3 videos that we've got, the TikTok videos, and we'll play them during the course of this effort. So I decided what we'd do is just simply walk through the Republic group that were right there to our right. I had decided just to do that, and we had somebody filming us, and we've got 1 or 2 good bits of film that we've still to put up on this. We walked through. That's us after having just walked through that group, at which point this police officer became interested in what we were about, and he said to us that he didn't want us to stand right there next to them. He was going to move us on further down the Royal Mile, and of course we just have to agree with whatever they say. But what then happened was basically more of our people started to arrive, and the police just kind of gave up on moving us along. They just had us there, and we're just happy they were okay for us just to be there right in the midst of that particular group. So it really actually worked out very well at the end of the day, in that we got to stand right next to these people, so we really were able to disrupt their optics, as they say. And so that's just at the beginning as well, and there was a bit of space in there. The guy there with the white t-shirt, he's a reporter for the National. One of them, they had at least 2 reporters for the National there, and that's our people with our placards. And then we moved closer to, these ones were the Scottish nationalist group, and there was just a very small number of them actually. There was maybe 6, maybe 10 at the very most of this particular group, and they were kind of strange because their big concern was not to be considered subservient. Well, who's subservient these days? Nobody's subservient. If you consider yourself to be subservient, then you're subservient only in your own mind. So that was a strange one, I have to say. That was a strange one. That guy also told me that he had 2 degrees, which seemed to make him believe that he was cleverer than I was, and, who really cares about that at the end of the day? I didn't want to dispute that one way or the other, but he was adamant in telling everybody how many degrees he had, which was kind of strange, really, when you get down to it. And that's just a general pick. What we're going to do now, actually, is go back to where we were, and let's play the second video.
Oh yes, it is! Oh yes, it is! Oh yes, it is! Oh yes, it is!
They had got this chant up called "Not My King," and so every time they shouted it, we would shout back, "Oh yes, he is!" We would shout back, "Oh yes, he is!" And so let's play that one again so you understand what's going on. It's only a 6-second video.
Oh yes, it is! Oh yes, it is! Oh yes, it is! Oh yes, it is!
Yeah. And there was other chants like that as well. That was their only chant. Which is a kind of effective one because it's only 3 words and it's only 3 syllables, and it's very easy to remember as well for them. So that helps them a lot. So we were coming up with stuff like that, and the usual Rule Britannia and God Save the King. This is us shouting God Save the King at the
King! God Save the King!
Can you take a wee photo from my phone, please?
There's only a couple of years left anyway.
Descendant of Robert the Bruce! Descendant of Robert the Bruce! Descendant of James the Sixth of Scots! Descendant of James the Sixth of Great Britain! God Save the King! Charles, King of Scots!
Basically, we didn't stop shouting all of that for about another 5 hours. I mean, what a day it was. And fair play to these guys, the ones that were there. They were the ones initially. That was before about another 20 of us eventually arrived. So fair play to those guys as well. Absolute troopers, and old Anthony there shouting how King Charles is a descendant of Robert the Bruce, and also that these folk were deluded, absolutely deluded. So let's go back to our pictures again. There we go. That was about sort of around about half an hour later, after these chaps on the left arrived and were very pleased to join us with their flag. And they were there all day as well. Fair play to them. And there's the next one. And you see that's a screenshot from the telly, so you can see the power of our posters to disrupt the messaging of the Republic group who had come up from London. And the Union Jack there works very well with the 2 saltires also. And the King of Scots slogan, that works really well. The next one, again, you can see the power of our red posters and the white sloganeering. Really powerful stuff, and I love that. That's going in a magazine, that one, if not in a book. It's a fantastic photograph, really powerful colours there. And that's a big flag at the top with a saltire and a Union Jack and a lion rampant, and it says SNP out. That's a chap came along who brought that along with him. Another powerful flag. Okay. And that was towards the end. Myself and a colleague. The chanting had died down, so I just thought, let's walk through them with this sign just to annoy them. And it did, I'm glad to say. And I have a t-shirt that says God Save the King. And that is a photograph from the internet. And you see there down on the bottom left, somebody in the middle of the crowd has got one of our posters and is holding it up. And isn't that just fantastic? Because if that had been side on, you would not have actually seen that slogan. But they're holding it, as it happens, towards what is the camera for that photograph, and you can see that as King Charles's limousine comes up the Royal Mile. So that's a great photograph. Now, there had been talk that it was going to be a horse-drawn carriage, the Scottish Royal Coach, and it should have been the Scottish Royal Coach. And in fact, the British government offered to pay for that, for the Scottish Royal Coach, for the extra, if it would indeed be extra cost. But believe it or not, it was Humza Yousaf who put the kibosh on that and said, no, we're going to do it in a limousine. For whatever reasons, I don't know. But that's what, according to Robert Hardman in the Daily Mail on Thursday the 7th, he said that the British government wanted it to be the Scottish Royal Coach, but Humza said it had to be the limousine. So there you go, opportunity missed. But nevertheless, we at least got that okay. And what was also liked about it as well was that the Household Cavalry came up, and there we go. And I think that's the Blues and Royals there at the front, and perhaps the Lifeguards at the back. But that's something you don't see on the Royal Mile very often. Okay, and one of our lot was really up close there. That's a photograph of them heading back down the Royal Mile. And I think that might be the last three horses behind the procession. And see the guy there in the middle with that pretty lethal-looking axe. That's quite a good photograph. Okay, that's another good one of the Blues and Royals heading back after the service back down to Holyrood House Palace. Okay, and there's another one of the, as I say, I think that's the Lifeguards. They all seem to be eyes left at that particular moment for whatever reason. I'm not sure. Maybe to pay homage to our photographer. I don't really know. Okay, and here's something I want to talk about, right? This was a well-organised group, the Republic group, well-organised. They came up from London, and the posters were twice the size of our posters, and they were made of Corex. And it's not cheap to turn them around, and every staff there had two posters screwed on to either side. So these were big posters, and they dominated the scene before we came along. And they even had these wee buggies to push them around in, and you'll see that in the next photograph. You see these wee buggies, so they bring up these buggies. Now, what would they have to carry that up from London in? So they've obviously got like a big van, if not a couple of big vans, to get all that stuff in. And make no mistake, this group, Republic, is well organised. They have full-time staff, okay? They have full-time staff. And groups like ourselves, as far as money is concerned, can't compete with these groups. As far as money is concerned, but we can compete as far as our energy is concerned and as far as our wits are concerned. And of course, we happen also to be correct. So we have got the truth on our side. And so all of these things help, and we can compete in that way. But when it comes to money, these agitating groups are very well financed. They're very well financed, and we need to remember that if there were ever to come to a crunch on these matters, these groups can easily outspend us. And groups like Republic, they take full-page adverts in newspapers. They have big banners, on motorways and places like that. They really have a big advertising budget, and they have a salaried staff. And here we are at a Force for Good, Here we are standing up to them. Thank goodness somebody is standing up to them. And let's finish with the last photograph. And you see, there we go. You see how our photograph there held by Anthony really stands out. It really stands out. Imagine if it was twice that size. well, we don't have the budget to make Corex boards, let alone make them twice the size of ours. But what we do, and we get seen and we get heard. What's the lesson? The lesson there is to keep fighting, to keep working, to keep doing what we do. And if there are folk out there who like what we do, folks, please do support us. We need all the help we can get at aforceforgood.uk/donate to. Now, we've got a guest coming up at the bottom of the hour. It's Avellina Balestri, all the way from Maryland, United States of America. So we're looking forward to that. Avellina is the editor of this book, this magazine actually. This is a magazine which comes out a couple of times a year. This is called Fellowship and Fairy Dust, and her last magazine, Happy and Glorious, A Royal Celebration, which has got lots of articles about the British monarchy, and in some places maybe European monarchy as well. And it's really a very unusual publication, I have to say. Anyway, the editor of that will be up at 7:30. Now, let's play the video of a couple of our activists who were sitting, watching, and who got interviewed a lot. And in fact, their photographs appeared also in the record and also on the internet. Let's play that video.
My boots are on the street for the union. My boots are on the street. And I work for it. I work very hard for it, as is a lot of my friends. So that's it. We need to keep the union. Long live the union.
Absolutely, long live the union. That was a comment there from one of our stalwart activists who was enjoying the sun and who was enjoying the day. And that lady's boots and her husband's boots are on the street for the union on a regular basis. And not everybody can be on the street, we know that. But if you can't be on the street, then please do try to help us in other ways, such as donating to our work. Because I'll be frank with you, we're going through a tricky time at the moment. A Force for Good. We only had one crowdfunder last year at Christmas, our Yo Britannia Christmas crowdfunder, and we did not raise what we had hoped we would raise, and we only raised enough for the first 6 months of the year. So we're entering a period where it's going to be difficult for the next 6 months of this year. So if you are able to help out with anything, then there's where you need to go, please. aforceforgood.uk/donate to, if you appreciate the work that we do to keep the British end up. And talking about the King of the United Kingdom, let's, just before we bring in Avellina, let's talk about this day in British history. Okay, so what happened on this day? Well, on this day, would you believe, historians date the King of England. Historians date the establishment of the Kingdom of England. Okay. And it was on this day that, here we go. It was on this day in 927 that the Kingdom of England was considered to have been established. And this was a result of the king of, or one of the leaders, one of the rulers of England at the time, called Athelstan. And he called a summit at Aymont Bridge, which is in the north of England. And he invited the rulers in Scotland and Wales and also the other in the north of England to join him. And he basically required them to agree with him that he was the king, not just of England, but the king of the whole of Britain, Athelstan. And that's how he considered himself at the time, the king of all of Britain. Well, as history has gone forward, historians have decided that he's just going to be the King of England. And that was because, of course, back then, declare yourself the king of something, but it was a lot harder to actually establish yourself as the king of it. And so, nevertheless, he called a meeting of the King of Strathclyde at the time, who was called. Do you know what? I'm going to have to actually. Yes, here we go. I'm reading from Tom Holland's book, Athelstan. Athelstan had chosen the location for his summit well. Welsh-speaking Cumbrians, English-speaking Northumbrians, Norse-speaking Scandinavians, all were to be found there. Halting beside the river Amont, Athelstan fixed his camp in the shadow of monuments. There would be no veiling of what was being demanded of them, acknowledgement of Athelstan's lordship. And sure enough, on the 12th of July, all the kings of the island were brought under his rule. Submission was made, payments of tribute pledged, oath sworn that no dealings would ever again be had with the heathen Vikings. And afterwards all departed in peace. However, it was a lot harder for him to actually hold that alliance together, and it eventually ended up in a big battle, which is called the Battle of Brunanburgh, a few years later in 937. But nevertheless, one of the first people to declare himself king of all of Britain, and recognised by historians as the first time that the actual kingdom of England came into being on this day, on the 12th of July in 927. Quite a day, if we are to believe the Anglo-Saxon chronicles and the historians of that time. Fascinating stuff. So I'll ask you a question about that in a minute. I can see that our guest is in the studio, and I'll bring Avellina on just in 1 minute after I've read out some comments here. AB Trains says, happy 12th of July if you're from Northern Ireland, by the way. Absolutely, it is. That's another day, 12th of July, the Battle of Aughrim. Derek Hart says, fight the good fight. We showed some of your photographs earlier, Derek, thanks for that. Paul says, this demo, and he's talking about what we did last Wednesday, this demo shows the great impact that just a few activists can make. Absolutely. There's Rita. Says, I'm framing my placard and it will go on my wall beside my pictures of our support of Her Majesty at the Kelpies. Well done, Rita. Well done. Well done for holding up that placard. See, if you come out with us, you can get these mementos. Now we're going to bring in our guest from Maryland, and we were speaking to Avellina earlier, and there may be some issues with the connection. Let's hope that there's not going to be. But if during the course of the interview Avellina falls in and out of the broadcast, don't worry, she'll be back in and we'll continue the conversation. Now, folk on TikTok, you won't see this because it's only on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter at UK A Force for Good. Okay, Avellina. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Avellina Balestri.
Hello. Hi, Alistair. How are you doing?
Very well, Avellina, and thank you very much for coming all the way from Maryland. What time is it in Maryland?
It is now just a little after 2:30 in the afternoon. So we're 5 hours back, except when there's the daylight saving time things happen, or daylight, going back, going forth.
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned to our viewers earlier that you are the editor of this magazine, Fellowship and Fairy Dust, which comes out occasionally. Now, we'll talk about that later on in the interview, and we'll talk about your efforts with this project and what it means to you and what it's all about. But I first heard about you and befriended you on Facebook going way back to 2014 2014, probably, if not maybe even 2013 at the time of
yes,
the referendum.
That memorable year.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because you were, along with one or two others, literally one or two others, Americans who were concerned to see the maintenance of the United Kingdom. And so I would like to ask you, how did you get into this concern for keeping the UK together? Would you like to give us some background on that, please, Avellina?
Sure. So for me, I mean, it came down to, in large part, studying history. So I've always been a history buff. I've always been, fascinated, first by English and then by wider British history. And I was fascinated by the way in which essentially peoples and their identities form. And, I always found it really a kind of an inspirational thing, the way that Britain came to be united, of all these different strands of peoples and all these different cultures and identities, that they could actually come together and form a whole. It always was something that I took an interest in. I have a great interest in the long 18th century era. So that was very much the time when, Britain was forged, as we understand it, the Act of Union in 1707 and everything that flowed out from that, really. And I was always fascinated by the military history of the period, and you get to see how influential Scotland and Scottish people were during the period. And these are things that don't get mentioned. They don't get referenced by lots and lots of people. They just think of Braveheart, as far as Scottish history. They don't think about Scotland in the context of Britain. And I've run into so many kind of strange interpretations of history, which will pit, Scotland against the British, or, and they don't seem to understand, Scotland is Britain. Scotland is an integral part. It's almost like, when two atoms are joined, you get a molecule. It's something that is unique, that is brought into being through the union. It's something distinct. And it's something that, for all the ups and downs and flaws and checkered aspects of history, I think it's a beautiful thing. I think that it's been a force for good, genuinely, in the world. And, I just was quite deeply saddened at the idea, at the prospect that people would throw that away, that people would enter into this divorce from each other for reasons that made absolutely no sense to me and continue to make no sense to me. They never really have. And I remember when I first learned about the referendum, when it was going to be, I genuinely felt rather sick because of how much it meant to me. And I knew I had various friends in all parts of the UK. And it just made me feel ill to think of them being torn apart, something that was holistic and brought together through so many, blood, sweat, and tears, in a sense, to forge the British identity, to forge the Union. And the idea that it was going to be scrapped for extremely poor reasons just genuinely distressed me. And so I, at the time, just thought, well, I would like to, if I can, do my bit in some way to try to help, to say that the Union matters, that Britain matters, that it's always mattered, and that there's far, far more good than bad in that no human project is perfect, but committing suicide, national suicide, is not the way to deal with the problems of the day, politically, or elements of history that, are checkered. That's not the way to handle it. So I wound up writing for a website called Open Unionism under Henry Hill and Paul Watterson, and they were involved in that. And I wrote several guest articles, became relatively regular there during the course of things. And then I embarked upon kind of a subset project called Union Jack Chat, which basically I went about interviewing people from all parts of the UK on the Unionist, side, and basically just asking him, what does the Union mean to you? What does Britain mean to you? How do you, identify? And these were people on all sides of the political spectrum as well. You got, conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, people in other independent type parties, and people who didn't identify strictly with a party. And they all did volunteer their views on why they thought the Union should hold together. And it ranged from, ideas of nationhood and identity to more pragmatic reasons. And sometimes a mix of both, which, it's probably healthy to have that, a mix of sort of the realism and the idealism. And, that's what countries are sort of formed upon. So I met many, many fascinating and dedicated people through that, including you. That was how we first met. And it was quite an experience. And, in a lot of ways, it was just nerve-wracking experience once you'd really entered into that and saving something, trying to engage in the work of saving something you believe to be precious. The realization that it could be lost, it was quite keen to me, what was at stake. And I think a lot of people just don't understand. They don't value, they're like, well, what's the difference with political unity between England and Scotland? And because they don't think, well, England plus Wales and Northern Ireland, but they don't think about it as being something precious because they don't seem to understand the idea of Britons, of people who now have a unified stake in something. So again, it was a very emotional experience, very harrowing experience. And through this, as you mentioned, there was myself and several other Americans, one of which was Wesley Hutchins, who, we're still good friends. He actually works on the magazine, Fellowship and Fairy does. And I met him through that. And of course, Ian Inkster is a very good friend of mine who we met up when I visited the UK in 2019 and, did the tour together. But, I met through the whole experience as well. And so I met very many good friends over the course of it, brought together by this love of people. It's really what it is. It's a love of a people and what they've become through the course of their story and what we believe they still can be through that,
Absolutely. That is so beautifully said. Everything you've just said there really summed that up so well. And thank you very much for that, because I know what you've just done there is you've expressed how lots of people felt at the time. You used the word distressed, you used the word feeling sick. I know for a fact that lots of people, not just in Scotland, but throughout the rest of the United Kingdom, were genuinely disturbed about it, because really when the referendum itself appeared to come out of nowhere, it was announced by David Cameron, who took it upon himself just to announce it back at the start of 2012, and suddenly everything got very real, and everybody's suddenly facing the fact that this centuries-old country called the United Kingdom could actually end as a consequence of a vote on one day. Forever, it could just end as a consequence of that, and not even a big majority, and not even a big turnout. There were no thresholds. There was nothing. It was just going to be a vote.
There wasn't, day. And I mean, I would think just naturally there should be a super majority for such a thing. I mean, and it was just such. You would have to demonstrate such an overwhelming desire for such a thing. I mean, and there was none. There was no overwhelming desire for such a thing. There never has been. And, it's just, it was. I remember the day. It just felt hazy. I mean, on this side of the Atlantic. Because of course, I was interacting, though, constantly with British friends through the whole thing. And it was just surreal what was going on. And it was just sort of like a little bit of a horror movie in a way. Like just something where you're dealing with people that you know and love, who are about to be severed from each other. It was just an uncanny and disturbing sensation.
Oh, absolutely, and it was touch and go as well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we can think, oh, we've got right on our side and our ideas are true, and so people will just see sense. But yeah, these exercises in mass democracy are very vulnerable to the introduction of power, by which I mean money, who's got the megaphone as well.
Absolutely. Who's speaking the loudest?
Yes.
And inevitably it would be it's always been this way. It's always been, the nationalist, yes, crowd is going to be louder inevitably. As opposed to people who are content with the status quo, because they're the ones, that have to really push and fight for their agenda. And it is, no, it was extremely risky. I mean, if I were the prime minister, you could not have paid me enough to have risked my whole country on that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yes. Just terrifying, really. And unless, again, there's such a super ultra majority of people who are demanding this in some way, you feel like you have to kind of cede to it. It wasn't anything like that. So that was a poor call. And I mean, all I can say is I sincerely hope they never make that poor call again. But,
that's right. And we can only but hope and pray that circumstances don't develop to the point where, for example, a future Labour government might see it in its temporary interests to grant something like that. Because very often... Which
concerns me. It genuinely concerns me. And I mean, I say this as someone with lots of Labour friends. I have friends from all parties. I'm not partisan in that way. But it deeply concerns me, some of the ideas of appeasement when it comes to nationalists in this department. Mm-hmm. And trying to, think that, if we just give them a bit more autonomy here and there, they'll be content. They won't be content. And I say this again with lots of respect for the people saying this. They want to save the union too. They're not, like a lot of the Labour friends I have, they're not saying it in bad faith. They really believe that. Unfortunately, I don't believe that it's going to work that way. I think that they have to rethink this and consider the fact that what needs to be strengthened is, quite frankly, the understanding of the union being the primary, reality of the country, the unification of the people, not, breaking it up, into little autonomous bodies that are only loosely affiliate with each other. It has to be about bringing a people together, from Orkney down to Dover. It has to be about unifying the island, and, all constituent parts of the UK. Beyond that, it has to be about that first and foremost. And there's different ways you can do, obviously, some autonomous things with individual constituencies. I'm not 100% against that, but it has to be done smartly. You can't just do it in order to try to appease nationalists, and it will end up doing is just feeding into their agenda. You have to do it in a way that, sure, there's local government, subsidiarity, I'm all for that sort of thing, but you have to do it wisely, and you have to do it in a way that doesn't undermine the union and that doesn't undermine the unity of the British people.
100%. I like your phrase there, understanding the union is the primary reality of the country. It's what makes Britain is that we're a union of all.
It's what makes the union flag the union flag. I mean, anybody who looks at the union flag, Union Jack, that's it's something that is, again, it's absolutely integral to the integrity of what the country is. you break up the Union, you tear apart the flag, you tear apart every aspect of what it means to be this specific reality, this specific national identity. There's no way of, just watering that down perpetually and expecting to be able to maintain that cohesion. Of course, I don't honestly see much. If you break that cohesion, I mean, I don't honestly see much of a good future in any regard with regards to these islands. Once you start breaking it down further and further, and they're all just, I guess you might say, piecemealed completely. It's just, again, it's sort of a distressing thought.
It is, and sometimes I wonder if some politicians deliberately almost want that to happen. I could imagine if I was some kind of globalist, like, let's just say George Soros, if he's still around or not. I'm presuming he is. You're going to look on Britain and you're like, I don't want that country to be united. It's an unusual country with an unusual history. But basically, if they get their act together and act as one, then it's game over for the globalists. And so if we can break this country down to the point where it's basically ungovernable and it's unrecognizable as any kind of coherent whole, any kind of coherent unity, then we win. And some of that the extreme localism that's getting promoted is going to have that consequence. Gordon Brown has written a big document for Labour, and if Labour is getting elected, there's a possibility that they'll enact it, and it's basically going to destroy parliamentary sovereignty in the United Kingdom. And it's going I deeply didn't like some of the ideas in that. Again, they're not all bad ideas. I'm not going to trash the entire document, but some of the ideas, they're just too far. Like abolishing the House of Lords, I think, is a bad idea. Reforming the House of Lords, fine. Abolishing the House of Lords, bad idea. And just various other ideas. I'll say this as an American, don't follow us in every respect. It doesn't work in every respect the same way. It's a mistake to do that. And I'm not saying that in the sense that, like, there are things that work in America that would not work in Britain the same way. And that's okay. It's okay. It's one of those things where trying to mimic directly another country, and sometimes I do get the impression some people in Britain get this sort of, I don't know, post-imperial sense that, well, I think that's what it is, sort of like this post-imperial guilt trip, in a sense, that makes them question everything that is unique about themselves. And also have the tendency to want to imitate they feel like they've lost their role as the great power, and so want to imitate the US in every respect. And I'm not saying there aren't things that Brits can learn from Americans, or that, can be learned from even the American systems. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is just blindly doing that to do that because, America is doing well, sort of, in different respects. Again, we are doing well in some ways and we aren't in others, just like in Britain. It's a mistake to blindly just follow what America is doing and expect it necessarily to translate properly in Britain. And I feel like that's what Labour does sometimes in some of its suggestions. And it's concerning. They have to think about Britain first, because they're, the ones trying to run Britain. They're not running the US, so that's a thing. That's right. Each country of the world has its own unique way of doing things. And the absurd thing about some of the political class in the Western world is they think that their model today is translatable in every other country in the world. And so that...
And this was a catastrophe when you think, this was a catastrophe in so many cases historically, especially in the early modern period, where it's just like post-World War I, for example. Yeah. The way that you hodgepodge break up empires and just install generic democracy as they see it. It's it doesn't, and of course we see it in the Middle East in all kinds of situations. You can't just think, if we just sort of paste this on top of this already existent culture and civilization, it won't necessarily, it may cause a lot of worse problems. So you need people who are intelligent enough to integrate certain ideas in a way that actually works in the countries and cultures they're being introduced to.
Absolutely. In the last few minutes that we've got left, Avellina, I'd like to give a plug to your novel. Tell us a little about your novel. And
sure. So the novel is here. So it's called Saplings of Sherwood. And one of the things that I think is applicable to this conversation, and in terms of the other writings that I do, because I'm also working on a duology of novels set in the 18th century as well, is that it does deal a lot. These both are set in the British Isles in large part and dealing with British characters. They basically are about identity a lot of the time in various different ways. So this one is a Robin Hood retelling series, and it's meant to be rather grounded in history. By the way, I loved your talk on Athelstan you gave in the beginning. And it is a lot to do with how identity is built. So for this one, it's a lot about how initially English specifically identity is built with the overlay of the various cultures in terms of, the Normans and the Saxons, which formulate the main conflict, but then also Celts and Danes and all sorts of people with different layers of background and how these people become one through a lot of turmoil, through a lot of, stress and strain, but they do. And that's a good thing. And it's the same thing with the 18th century one, which is set during the American Revolution broadly. And basically it deals a lot with the situation in Britain at the time, which people forget about, and which dealt a lot with, how Britain was just really coming into being as a united entity. I mean, it had always, as you've mentioned many times in the past in your articles and so forth, there always were threads of this unity and people knowing it needed to happen. Like various threads of it coming together over the course of history. The idea of uniting the island was always somewhere there. And ultimately, when it finally does, first through the crowns and then ultimately through the parliaments, and you get the finally Britain comes into being, which was supposed to be in perpetuity. We have it even in the writing there. It wasn't understanding it was some temporary arrangement that you just pull the plug on. But basically, yeah, the story there in the 18th century deals very much with the presence of Scotsmen there and the presence of people from all parts of Britain, and all parts of the British Isles at this time. And how they were just coming together in this form of an identity. And of course, it, again, was fraught with difficulties, many of which, in the case of the book that I'm writing, had to do with religious difficulties because, the main character of it, to give it very brief, is a Catholic recusant character. And he's dealing with how to try to be a part of this identity while dealing with inhibition, these laws, the penal laws that are basically inhibiting him from being a full part of the society as a Catholic, and how he has to try to deal with that. And there's various other conflicts throughout the story like that. But ultimately it is a story of hope that, these things, these injustices can be overcome and unity can come. It's just a matter of, frankly, being true to the ideal in a way, and trying, even sometimes through dissent, but still holding that, unity is something to be we should strive after unity. And there is something beautiful in the idea of unity coming together. There's something we should try to make an ever more perfect union, to sort of put, the Lincolnian rhetoric into this, but really that should be the idea here. So
I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. Absolutely. It's called Saplings of Sherwood. Yes,
that's the one that's published. So yes, I eagerly would hope that if anyone would purchase it, if you would give me read it through, give me a review on Amazon and Goodreads, because it really does help with them advertising it and so forth.
Good. Well, just before we say goodbye at the top of the hour, I want to just give a mention also to your magazine, which came out this year. The title of the project is Fellowship and Fairy Dust, and this particular magazine is called Happy and Glorious, a Royal Celebration. So it was brought out to commemorate the coronation year.
Yes.
And thank you very much for asking me to contribute an article to it.
Yes, we're honored to have you. We were honored to have you on board. And thank you for pitching it earlier as well. That was greatly appreciated.
Yes. Well, what we'll do is we'll put the link to Amazon, the Amazon sale, in the comment threads on our Facebook and Twitter, and
wonderful.
We'll keep pushing it, and certainly some unusual articles as well on
we have a wide tent in terms of the types of people from all different countries and all different perspectives and interests who submit to FNF. So yeah, it was definitely, I was quite pleased with the product, how many different sorts of people had brought different historical highlights to it and so forth, and different commentaries again on monarchy in general and so forth, because it's
and your next one is going to be what's going to be the particular subject?
The next one is actually going to be on early American history, so we're going back across the Atlantic, and there's going to be lots of crossover though, of course, with British stuff, because early America does have we're integrally connected, and we can't help it.
I think that early America, what I like to call British America before 1776, is kind of almost forgotten about. It's American history. Maybe I'm wrong, but from my perspective on this side of the channel, it's like America began in 1776. Well, no, it didn't.
Technically, it would be more like 83 when the actual ratification of the Treaty of Paris. But yeah,
yes.
like there was still, it was disputed. 76 forward was massively disputed. But yeah, no, it is. You're right. There is a sense that that kind of colonial history and how things worked as the American colonies under the crown is just one of those ways that we do have so many layers of connection, and it really does change the way you even view the revolution as a civil war. More so, that's what it was. It was ultimately a civil war between people who up to that point had considered themselves British. So it was quite heartrending in various ways. I've always found that to be rather a tragic element of the war. And I mean, I think
if people like you and I were alive back then, we would have our hearts broken about just seeing this conflict among our own people. It would just be terrible.
And people forget also that there was plenty of American loyalists. The thing is that there was a three-way split. 1/3 was in favor of the revolution, 1/3 was loyal to the crown, and 1/3 was neutral. They were just trying to survive it. So people forget and otherize the loyalists as being not really Americans. No, they were. They're totally Americans, and it was totally a valid position to hold. So that was something too that is often forgotten, and it's something that I think could be more often remembered as well.
Well, absolutely. We need to bring that out, and you are bringing it out in that magazine, which I can't wait to see and to purchase when it comes out. And we'll definitely have you back on to talk about it as well, and if not before then, because this has been an amazing conversation. And
yes, it's really enjoyable.
You're bringing to the table here needs to be heard, and needs to be heard a lot. And so we're going to do whatever we can, Avellina, to make sure that your thoughts, which are so important to the British Union and to the maintenance of Britain, continue. So we've spoken for longer.
Thank you,
than
and
we
again,
wanted,
I'm so
glad.
Yeah, so impressed by you guys. The work that you do with a Force for Good, showing up in these various situations. Again, was just watching the Scottish coronation protest stuff, and I see you guys out there, and I'm just yeah, I know. They're my mates. So it's great to see. It's great to see you all. Ian keeps me updated all the time. So, I'm cheering. Know that you have people cheering you on overseas.
Great. Well, it's so good to know that. And let's stay in touch until the next time, Avellina. But until then.
Okay. Thank you so much. And happy 12th to all those. Happy 12th to all those doing bonfire nights. And remember to be nice to Catholics.
I'm sure there will be. Absolutely. Yes. After they've heard you.
Love us. Love on us.
There will be. Good stuff. Okay, Avellina. good night
Okay.
or good afternoon in
Yes,
Maryland.
absolutely. Good night. God bless.
See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye
You
now.
too. Bye.
Fantastic. What a guest Avellina is, and what a font of information and historical knowledge, and we are so grateful to have her and her fellow pro-British Americans on side, aren't we? So absolutely lucky. Absolutely great stuff. Folks, we will be back next week, and we'll have another fantastic guest next week. And so it just remains for me to say thank you so much for listening. Thank you to my fantastic guest that we had on. And we shall see you next week. So it just remains for us to say God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next time.